You're listening to Breaking Biz Dev with John Tyerman and Mark Wainwright. Conversations that break down, beat up, and redefine business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. And now for your hosts, John and Mark.
Welcome back to Breaking Biz Dev. If it's your first time here, thanks for joining us on this podcast where we like to beat up and break down topics related to business development. My name is John Tyerman, and I'm joined, as always, by my trusted co-host, Mark Wainwright. Mark, what's up?
How are you, John? I am doing great. Welcome to another episode. We're going to talk about lead generation today. We're going to poke the bear a little bit about lead generation.
Yep.
Because I know a lot of firms out there, John, that have no idea what lead generation is all about, that it's not part of how they get new clients. And, they just think that it's all about referrals or, other stuff. Referrals are a good lead generation source, but we're going to dig into that. I think there's a whole bunch of lead generation opportunities out there that so many firms turn their back on. So we're going to get to it, but I know you wanted to mention something first. So
yeah, we are going to turn some firms into believers of lead generation. But to your point, yes, first, I want to remind folks to please rate and review the show if you enjoy the content that we're putting out. I'd like to read a recent review from Hannah Smolinski, who says, "The podcast is pure gold. It's been helpful for my agency as we create our business development processes. I don't know of any other podcast being this transparent and helpful on the subject." So, Hannah, thank you so much for the review and for the kind words. That's amazing to hear.
Flattery gets you somewhere. Absolutely. Yeah, that's so great. Hannah is a professional connection of mine. She has a fractional financial services company that she founded, and she works with professional services firms just like the ones, John, that you and I work with. She is an absolute rock star. Her fractional CFO organization is called Clara CFO Group. She is an absolute monster on YouTube.
Yes.
She has almost 80,000 followers on YouTube and has published over 300 videos there. And they are super useful. I've looked at a number of them, just little old me in my, sole practitioner practice. I've looked at a number of her videos and thought, oh yeah, right, great. That totally applies to me. That's not just, larger firms or different firms or whatever else. That's totally applicable stuff. So she's great. Thanks a ton, Hannah. We really appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you, Hannah. All right. So let's get into our topic today, Mark. We are beating up lead generation. Firms don't believe in lead generation, and we want to perhaps shed some light onto why maybe they should change their mind. But first, before we do that, let's define what we mean by lead. So, Mark, what is a lead?
Great question. The eternal question. There are so many definitions for all of these commonly sort of, thrown about terms: leads, opportunities, prospects, all pipeline, all these different terms that are sort of second nature to people like me, people that, are professional marketing folks. But for the sake of this conversation, and I would say for most of the organizations out there, simply put, a lead is a maybe. Now, there's a whole bunch of little qualifiers kind of underneath that, but I generally refer to a lead sort of in, common language as a maybe. A lead needs to be associated with a person. I don't associate leads with organizations. I associate leads with people. And a lead is a yet to be qualified maybe, right? So it's someone who comes to your organization. It's someone that maybe you are prospecting with that has shown some potential interest, and they have yet to go through some filtering, some qualification step, some qualification process. That is an important first step in your sales process before they actually get into your sales pipeline, which should be filled with great ideal clients who you can serve, who are going to be good partners, et cetera. these leads, these maybes need to be qualified. And I know that John, you have some thoughts on the world of leads as well.
Yeah, I think I really like that definition. A lead is a maybe. I come from a world of lead generation myself, working in marketing agencies. Lead generation is a big part of the service that, I provide to clients or have provided to clients in some capacity in that inbound motion. So that's kind of the world that I come from. I know that, Mark, you do a little bit more outbound work with your clients and helping them, with prospecting and generating business that in that way. So I like that we're bringing two different perspectives to this.
You brought up the point of since this podcast is built on this whole sort of continuum of marketing to sales, we've talked previously about that 1 through 5, that sales related activities are 5 and marketing activities are related to more of the ones, right? Lead generation happens all across, I think, that spectrum. And when people who are part of a sales team, whether they call themselves a salesperson or not, right? People who are responsible for revenue generation, well, those are sales related activities. When they are doing lead generation, that's typically more proactive prospecting, outreach, that sort of stuff. Right. On the marketing end of things, there's a lot more inbound, where you're seeking to attract individuals to your firm through content generation and whatever other mechanisms you have to attract attention and sort of build engagement with your firm or with your brand. So leads can happen anywhere across that whole spectrum.
Yeah, and we'll share some examples of that later on. But first, I guess, Mark, from your perspective, why don't firms believe in lead generation? Why don't they believe that leads will come to them inbound?
Yeah, it's the strangest thing, but yeah. I kind of get it. I spend a lot of time with architects, engineers, other experts like that, and I think that the vast majority of those individuals and those firms believe that the attention they get, the attraction to their firm has to do with their level of expertise, right? If we are the best architects out there, people are just going to form a line at our front door and they're going to work with us, right? So their lead generation activities, their lead generation motions are almost non-existent, or they are part of this sort of hamster wheel where they are constantly going and searching for and finding open solicitations. There's municipalities RFPs, or public or private clients, or whoever they have open active solicitations, requests for proposals, requests for qualifications, things like that. And they have a marketing team who's the vast majority of any lead generation activities are just going and finding these RFPs out in the ether, out in the world out there somewhere, whether they're posted online or there's some services that collect them, or they have to search with specific, service, municipalities, whoever they are. So a lot of marketing teams in these specific sort of expert firms believe that lead generation is going and getting the active RFP solicitation that's on somebody's website, and then you drag it back to the office and share it through email with 4 of the partners, and you go through some crazy no-go process like we've talked about in the past with some of our guests, and beat that up a little bit. So that's I think a lot of the expert firms that I work with, they think that they'll get clients because of their expertise, and they'll just show up some magical way. They'll get these kind of referrals, maybe serendipitous sort of connections, and then they'll go grab these open solicitations, which all sounds completely reasonable, but there are so many other ways to be proactive and to generate leads. And that's a little bit what we're going to talk about today. And I think that different types of professional services firms and different sizes of firms can approach all of this, or maybe even just look at this all a little bit differently. I know you had some thoughts on, maybe different size of professional services firms and how they might sort of approach or think about lead generation.
Yeah. Yeah, many of the firms that I've engaged with have been in that mid-size range. And so that kind of got me thinking a little bit about the stages of business maturity for professional services and what lead generation looks like, and its relative importance by stage. So if you think about, small firms, these are firms, maybe there's a couple of employees, right? So you hire a couple of, maybe they're designers, or, maybe they're associate architects if you're an AEC firm, or maybe they're associate accountants. Maybe they haven't gotten their CPA yet if they're
Right.
an accounting firm. And typically in these scenarios, new business is generated mostly from the founder's network or the partner's network. Referrals, you mentioned RFPs.
Right.
So that's typically how new business is won. And a lot of those small firms, that's all that they can handle. What I've noticed is that when firms grow to get to that mid-sized, that referral well starts to dry up a little bit. And so
Right.
then it becomes, okay, well, how else can we generate new business? We want to continue growing. That's our plan. We have all these people that we have on the payroll. We need the revenue to support it. That's where firms start to explore potential new channels to build their pipeline. Perhaps it's investing in content, perhaps it's investing in social media, or perhaps it's investing in an outbound prospecting type of program. So there's a number of different directions that firms at that mid-size level, they can go. Now, as firms grow larger and larger, I'd say that the lead gen has been embraced by a lot of these large firms. They understand that lead generation is an important part of winning new business. However, what I've noticed at these large firms is there's not enough focus on the offer. What happens is it bloats paid media spend, and these large firms believe that all they need to do is dump a bunch of dollars into LinkedIn ads or Google ads, and that'll fuel their pipeline. But it doesn't always work out that way.
They're not focused or specific enough.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Raise your hand for a consultation. That's just not good enough of an offer.
Right.
It needs to be a little more crispy than that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I love how you broke down those different firm sizes. I have a fantastic client who started off as a small firm, and they are growing, and they were spending a ton of money as a small firm on chasing after those very expensive RFPs.
Yeah.
And fortunately, when I started working with them and we started talking about this, they said, well, this is fantastic because there has to be a different way. There has to be a better way of growing our business, of finding new opportunities. And we can't continue to, as a small firm, we're tough, we're feisty, all those great things that small firms like to say about themselves, but they just have a really hard time competing, in those really formal selection processes. And they're just so expensive. I mean, I've said this in the past that, firms of all different types can spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on really complex competitive pursuits where there's no guarantees of success. So that can be a problem.
And it's competitive too. So it drives down your margins.
Right.
So we've beat that up enough.
Right. I gave an architecture firm example. Different industries approach this differently, and you and I are fully aware that when we talk about the world of professional services, that there are various industries within that big umbrella that look at all this a little bit differently. Architects, engineering firms, accounting firms, law firms, management consulting firms, marketing agencies, web developers, everybody who sort of sells their expertise, they look at lead generation a little bit differently. A lot of these sort of legacy expert firms, law, architecture, accounting, I think a lot of them really lean super heavily on that whole referral end of thing and connections and, more of the sort of relational stuff. Like, oh no, I have to go to a conference and meet people and shake hands in order to build relationships and then have that turn into projects. But they kind of ignore all these other opportunities for lead generation. Web developers, I mean, they probably go to conferences, but I think it would be absurd of them to think that they're going to get all their new leads through relationships. They're doing, you have to know that web developers are trying to maximize the digital channels, that they are getting a ton of inbound leads through search engine optimization and content and all that stuff, really working hard on those digital channels.
Yeah. And in marketing agencies too, I would lump in that category, especially because, when you market a marketing agency, essentially you kind of got to show what you do. For example, at Hinge, it was let's do a bunch of research and then use that as content because research is a service offering. When I was at Silverback Strategies, it was let's really hone in on our paid media strategy for generating leads because we're a paid media agency. Today, I focus on podcasting and showing my value that way because I'm essentially a one-man podcast agency. So, there's showing your work through your content. And that's nothing that's unique to marketing agencies. Accounting firms, AEC firms can do that too. You mentioned earlier, these experts think that they can just do good work and the business will follow. Doing good work is absolutely part of that, but how do you package that up and show that at scale? And I think that's really kind of the key to inbound lead generation.
Good. Yeah. And I think the problem all of this is trying to highlight is the fact that firms of any size, small, medium, large firms, professional services firms in any of these industries, AEC, architecture, management consulting, marketing agencies, are not employing all of these, they're not exploring and utilizing and leveraging all of these lead generation opportunities out there. They're doing it very selectively and limiting their lead generation. So what we want to talk about a little bit more, I think, is what can they do instead of continuing to turn your back on, your architecture firm should be generating leads online, right? Or your web development agency should be leaning hard into referrals, creating a really proactive referral engine inside your organization. Yeah, they should be exploring all of these, and I think we're gonna chat about that. You're listening to Breaking Biz Dev,
the podcast that beats up, breaks down, and redefines business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. Your hosts are John Tyerman, founder of Red Cedar Marketing, the podcast marketing company for experts and professional services firms,
and Mark Wainwright, principal consultant and founder of Wainwright Insight, the fractional sales manager and sales consultant to professional services firms.
If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by following the show and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts.
And now, back to the show.
Yeah, let's do it. So what should they be doing in regard to lead generation? I think number one, we talked about this a little bit. They need to take lead gen seriously. Yeah. You can generate leads online, offline through other kinds of sources. You mentioned referrals. I'll give you an example. So I keep track of all the leads that come in through my own marketing and sales pipeline. And I've kind of categorized them by source. I have 8 different sources of leads that I think this is two years worth of data or 18 months worth of data. 45% come from LinkedIn, about 25% from referrals, about 11% come from existing relationships. I have another podcast called Podcasting in Professional Services. About 7% of the leads come through that, another 5% from Twitter, another 3% from this podcast, Breaking Biz Dev. Yeah. Organic search is a little low on my end, only 2%, and then 1% from Facebook. So I think that gives you kind of a well-rounded pie, some slices bigger than others, but that just goes to show you that leads can come from any number of channels.
Yeah, great. I love it. And what you've pointed out here, what you just talked through, there's inbound stuff where people are coming to you. There's some outbound motions to that. So those are all blended in that. All those are all good, right? Those are all great ways of generating maybes. And also the other thing, as you're reading through that, I'm trying to figure out how you're connecting all of these leads. I mean, do you have a process where you just, you're one of the first questions you ask them is, hey, how'd you come across me? You probably have some mechanisms to connect those leads from their source. others you probably have to kind of just ask?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I just want to point out that, Mark, since we started doing this podcast, I've taken outbound a lot more seriously, and I've been applying a lot of your wisdom that you've shared around prospecting and building out referral sources and referral programs and things like that. Most of that outbound activity I'm doing is on LinkedIn. There's source and then there's motion. So the source would be LinkedIn, the motion would be outbound. And so that's kind of how that's categorized in my system.
Yeah.
And that's why LinkedIn is so big of a slice in my pie, is because that's typically the channel that I'll use for outbound.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, you mentioned, how do I know which channel they come from if they're on an inbound? A lot of the inbound stuff that I get is from LinkedIn, but if I know that they're in existing relationship, it's not the channel that I attribute to that lead, it's the relationship.
Yep.
Or is it a referral from someone? Even if it came through LinkedIn, I'll still count that as a referral, because I look at referrals as a separate channel. It doesn't matter what they come through. Now, if someone reads one of my LinkedIn posts and then they reach out to me, whether it's a DM or a comment, and they say, hey, I'm thinking about starting a podcast, let's start a conversation, then I would attribute it to LinkedIn.
That's good. I can't say my methodology is as precise, because you love your numbers, but I do benefit from a pretty broad variety of inbound leads. I have leads that just send me a note directly, send me an email directly, and just say, hey, you might be our guy. You might be the one we need. And I've had leads through existing relationships, leads through referrals, leads through outbound motions, asking for referrals, doing prospecting sequences. And again, we're not talking today about, how you get new contracts. We're talking about leads, right?
Yeah.
The projects and the contracts come after the leads. We are strictly focused on leads. It's important what happens after you get the leads, but today we're talking about lead generation. We're talking about just getting all the maybes, getting as many maybes as you can, the right ones, to the front door, where
That's
you
right.
then need to vet and qualify them. And you need to do that as many ways as possible. If you are a marketing person in an engineering firm, and all you do day in, day out is go check in Seattle, it's called the Daily Journal of Commerce, right? If you go check the DJC for all of the RFP listings, if that's the only way that you come up with maybes, then you are underserving your organization.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
So we've got a couple examples here, John, that you came up with just to kind of ground this whole thing in reality. The two examples you have one from an accounting firm and one from an architecture firm. I would love if you could kind of share those. And these are examples of firms that you're familiar with who are doing a good job with lead generation.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy to share. So first, Tri-Merit is a specialty tax firm. They specialize in R&D tax credits. They're an accounting firm. They've got about 50 employees. Randy Crabtree, he was the managing partner of the firm, and he's since transitioned into a new, more external-facing role where he hosts a podcast called The Unique CPA. So for folks that are in the accounting space that are listening right now, they're probably familiar with Randy's show. It's one of the top accounting podcasts. If you go to Tri-Merit's website, it features not only a chat bot where you can click on the chat bot and you can ask a question, you can get feedback in real time. So that's a form of lead generation. But they also have multiple calls to action on their homepage to schedule a discovery call via Calendly. So it's not just you're clicking to another page and then filling out a form. Right there on the homepage, you can schedule a meeting. So it's reducing the friction of point A to point B. Because if you have to click through to a contact page and fill out a form with a bunch of required fields. Those are all hurdles that you're putting in front of your prospective buyers to actually having a conversation with you. So I think that Randy and his team over at Tri-Merit do a great job at reducing that friction. But then also his podcast has generated leads. I've interviewed Randy on my other show, and he's talked about how that podcast has kind of like transformed his career. So I think that's just one example.
No, it's fantastic, and my sarcasm is going to well up here, John. So what you're telling me here is that making it easier for individuals who visit your website to be able to contact you actually is a positive thing. That's what I'm hearing.
Yep. I mean, unless you want to try to scare your buyers away. Right.
Right. Have them have to solve some, like do like 6 reCAPTCHA, sort of, are you a robot things. If you have to do that 12 times in order to contact you, that's I'd call that friction. Yeah. That's
how many good. Pictures have bridges in them?
Yeah, that's good. So multiple calls to action, totally reasonable. Mm-hmm. Some people out there may think, oh, that's making my skin crawl. Right. But it's what you need to, if it's really hard for someone to find the button to reach out to you, or then if they have to, 6 clicks in, they find your contact us page, and then they have to fill out a form that has 7 cells in it. Yeah, that's friction. Just make it easy, and then you do your vetting, right? When they interact with you, when you receive an inquiry, then you vet, right? And then you have a good way of going through and filtering and qualifying those maybes. So good, I like it. Good. So the next one you have is an architecture firm, right?
Yeah, this is VLK Architects, which is an architecture firm based in Texas, and they focus on educational architecture, specifically public K through 12 schools in Texas.
Yeah.
They are running a PPC campaign, a pay-per-click campaign on Google, and they're targeting the keyword architectural design services. Now, this keyword, if you're familiar with SEO, it has commercial intent, which means that folks that are using that or searching for that keyword have the intent of finding some sort of commercial entity. Typically, any keyword with the modifier services on it has commercial intent. Anyways, I digress. That keyword has about 400 monthly searches, and according to some of the SEO tools that I have, estimate cost per click around $4.50. So
that's some money.
That is some money. So it's not a cheap keyword, but again, it's a keyword with commercial intent. When folks click through to their website, that campaign, by the way, drives traffic to their homepage.
Yeah.
Now their homepage leads with this video that reinforces their position around educational architecture. The video highlights their differentiator, that they include a past educator on their planning team. So this highlights the depth of their education experience and its impact on the final product, the design of the building. The contact form, again, is simple. It's also optimized for mobile. And that's important, especially if you're running a pay-per-click campaign where the traffic is more likely to come through mobile. I know that in professional services, the vast majority of traffic to your website is on a desktop, but that's constantly changing and fluctuating.
Yeah.
So making that contact form simple and optimized for mobile, I thought was good. I think this is a great example of highlighting differentiators, leaning on paid media as a lead gen tool, and then reducing friction of the contact process.
Yeah, this absolutely flies in the face of so many firms and individuals I know in the architecture profession who think that, being demure and kind of hard to put your finger on exactly what they do and who they do it for and the language they use and everything else. This flies in the face of it. This says, this is exactly who we are. We're going to run hard at this one specific thing. We are going to be overt about our focus, about our expertise. We're going to make it super easy to contact us. And, lo and behold, they're presenting a very clear message that's obviously, creates, makes it really easy to get in touch with them. So why not? Absolutely. Yeah.
Believe in lead generation. It is possible. Here's some examples.
Right. It is possible. Right. So there's a ton of industries out there who believe they are in a completely relational business, which means it's all backslaps and handshakes, right? None of these digital channels are going to pay off. Nothing on social, nothing on their website, whatever else. So they don't believe that happens, but they're turning their back on all this stuff. And this works for architects. It works for accountants. It works for everyone who traditionally has thought that our only lead generation is going to come from the folks that are sitting in my Rolodex, right? There it is,
That's right.
100-year-old term. So this has been really helpful. My goal with this, and John, we talked about this, my goal is just that more professional services firms of all different types and all different size firms start to regard all these different opportunities to generate leads and then vet them and turn them into great clients, that they just embrace all these different channels, that they're not just stuck in a rut and trying to generate maybes using the same technique, same channel again and again and again.
Yep. One word of caution before we close out, Mark. There is a very real scenario where you can spread yourself too thin too. So I think that's just something to keep in mind if folks are listening to this podcast and they want to invest in lead generation. Don't spread yourself too thin. Focus on one channel and then build from there.
Right. I think that's smart. And the other thing is that, starting to track, just like you did, sort of which leads you're getting, and then seeing which ones then connect with really successful clients is important. So that's important. If you are continuing to dump time, energy, and money into lead generation channels or techniques that aren't really working for you, that aren't turning into great clients, then you should either question how you're doing it, or you should question that lead generation technique just in general. So yeah, there's definitely some words of caution, but explore them all and see which ones work the best. And lo and behold, you may find some that work incredibly well that you had never explored before.
And that are more profitable than the clients that you'd win under the traditional RFP model.
Yeah, great point. Great point. John, this has been a great conversation. Until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Biz Dev. Subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or listen to the show at breakingbizdev.com. This episode was produced by Red Cedar Marketing. If you think a business podcast is right for your company, visit redcedarmarketing.com to learn more.